first met Michael, mid-70s. I was just finishing up at K-Ville campus. Could have been my last year, and Michael came to teach there. Memory is a bit blurred now, but I distinctly remember him there, and we became fast friends. And because I was involved in theater, Michael in theater and the arts, we quickly, I think, became part of our circle of friends in Barbados. But also, I was fortunate in those years to make friends with some, I would say, important Guyanese artists who were, of course, family friends of Michael: Clement Tate, Mark Matthews, Ken Corsbie. And of course, he lived in St. Lucia for many years teaching. So my relationship with Michael was a long one. He gave me one of my first reviews of my poetry in the Wasafiri magazine. When I launched a book of poetry called St. Lucian at the Central Library here, he was my featured speaker. And so we got on very well. I say we had a circle of friends, not just Guyanese, but Caribbean friends involved in literature and theater, and of course, his filmmaking. So even as I talk about this now, sort of off the top of my head, I'm remembering how Michael has been so instrumental in my own development as a writer, as a Caribbean artist. And I saw him do plays here. He was a friend of Derek Walker's. I saw Michael act and direct Walker's plays right here in St. Lucia, as well as other places. I worked with a place called the Folk Research Center, and Michael did a one-man show, The Last of the Red Men, which I helped him to organize.
We have to begin to reclaim, to reconstruct our buried Guyanese native traditions of community, the Tumatumari, or sleeping rocks of our polyglot cultural identity. This is and has been a major concern of our artists and writers, and our filmmakers need to be concerned too. Let me quote from the late Denis Williams. Now, he was speaking in his book, Pages of Guyanese Prehistory, about the Amerindian legacy of community, respect for, and adaptation to the landscape. This legacy, Denis reminds us, is the element in our heritage that the Europeans neither discovered nor destroyed. We cannot ignore it without great loss to ourselves. Research has shown that the jungle of the Amazon basin gave rise to and supported flourishing, complex societies with highly developed art forms. This represents an indigenous cultural history spanning more than 10,000 years. This is the background to the so-called marginal Aboriginal presence in our region and in the world. One important legacy of primal cultures is the connection they make between their arts of the imagination, the landscape, and their way of life. It's a connection which most developed urban and coastal societies have lost.
Miss Winifred McDavid was well known to be the country's finest piano teacher and stern guardian of the lovely Joan. None of the other schools could ever reach her standard. Lessons there would be a dream come true. There was a vacancy. His father shook his head. No, your brother should go. He's older. You will go next time. His dream fell dead. A letter would be sent confirming what was said. He'd take the letter. With luck, it might give him another chance to see those hazel eyes turning again to look at him with mild surprise. A sudden downpour as he turned into her street, rain falling hard out of a clear blue sky. If he took shelter underneath her house and had the luck to meet her there, how would he speak to her? Weak with the love that he was ravished by, wet with his shame, he rode into a salt goods shop already filling up with cowards sheltering. He was in hell. Heaven was across the street, curtained by rain. He could hear her playing arpeggios. That would be his brother's bliss, not his, not his. All he could do was curse his luck and wait. Caught in that hell mouth, he was already too late. The envelope he carried had sealed his fate. The rain stopped. He wheeled his cycle out. Hellmouth emptied its dark shelterers with their damp bags and bundles out onto the street. On the other side, she'd come out and was sitting astride her bike on the bridge outside her gate. He forgot what he'd come to do. She was Nike tying her shoelaces, supple back bent to the task. Her blue-green uniform, belted at the waist, showed the shy swell of her breasts, brown ringlets of hair escaping the brown rim of her straw hat and its embroidered Bishop's High School band. Those gray-green eyes had turned to him and caught his look. He saw her blush and turn away, and every fiber in his body shook. Forgive his lovesick adoration of the girl riding to school, brown arms bare, sapodilla warm, her hat a Gauguin halo. The afternoon rain sprinkled and sun-kissed like Debussy's L'après-midi d'enfant, bright drops falling from the immortelles like diamonds, like the scales that fell from her piano. He would ride out of his way to take the road she took to ride to school, hoping to meet her, tongue-tied when he did. Sick with cowardice, the fool would ride under her house to hear her play, then ride away. It was his Mecca now, 33 Barrack Street. It had become the image of his love, darkness below, a world of music above. He would become a showman, make tigers purr, elephants kneel down on rubber knees. He'd stage the greatest show on earth for her. Without a net, he'd fly from a trapeze, brave hoops of fire, ride naked through the flames. She was his circus's still center. 50 years later, seeing those unruly city names, Blegzect, Prashad Nagar, Lamaha, Laluni Street, he'd still see her, their names again answering her name, until the city's circus, tamed, became Jonestown. He loved her for the woman she already was. She loved him for the man he would become.
Harris's work is profoundly relevant, not only to the Caribbean sensibility, but to thinking people everywhere, to anyone who is genuinely concerned with the quality of our response to life. His work seems eccentric or obscure precisely because it represents the imaginative daring which has always refused to accept fixed or static literary, cultural, racial, political, or geographical boundaries. And because it is also that rare thing, a humane, integrated, and honestly subjective vision of the world, what D.H. Lawrence once called a man in his wholeness, wholly attending. In this book, I have attempted, through a detailed investigation of the works themselves, of the curiously mythopoeic, proliferating quality of their images and ideas, to trace the growth and direction of Harris's art. I am chiefly concerned with his relevance to the Caribbean novel as a whole. I have also attempted to explore the universal implications and echoes in his work by making close, critical readings of the novels, pursuing the theme of psychic reconstruction, the main thread running throughout the Bildungsroman of Harris's fiction. I have tried, if not to explain, at least to identify both the difficulty and the importance of the novels. One is, of course, aware that there are real dangers in adopting a deliberately subjective psychological approach to the criticism of literature. Such an approach can lead to serious aberrations of critical judgment. As C. D. Lewis once observed, the penalty for too earnestly probing and tapping at the surface of the image is that we fall through into the black waters beneath it. And indeed, the view that Caribbean writing embodies a search for identity, the result of racial, cultural, and psychic disorientation, has already become a dangerous cliché in the criticism of Caribbean literature. Yet, the idea of a division of consciousness is clearly a preoccupation with Caribbean writers, affecting both subject matter and literary quality. The Caribbean writer's crisis of identity, his need for roots within the context of his own landscape, as well as for the cultured, metropolitan atmosphere in which his art can grow and flower, is a dilemma which still exists and makes possible the apparent paradox in which the successful Caribbean writers, with few exceptions, live and work abroad, mainly in Britain and North America, but quarry their materials from within a Caribbean consciousness. The crisis of identity is a peculiarly Caribbean theme, amounting at times almost to an obsession, and it is against this background of racial and cultural schizophrenia, the main leitmotif in the Caribbean novel, that we must first see Harris's work. The astonishing upsurge of writing in the Caribbean, in the period between the 1950s and the 1970s, a significant and rich body of literature was created from virtually nothing, is clearly related in a very special way to the West Indian sense of rootlessness and the consequent need to formulate a racial and cultural identity. Post-colonial West Indian societies were, in a sense, forced to come to terms with their own broken cultural ties with the past and their new racial and cultural links with the present. The search for a cultural pedigree had begun. The lack of a continuous, coherent cultural and racial background, what Denis Williams refers to as the lack of the assurance of the indwelling racial ancestor, drives the West Indian writer to ask over and over again the question, who am I? Although the attempt in the novel to assert a positive West Indian way of life, a West Indian identity and culture, began with earlier writers like Claude McKay, C.L.R. James, and Alfred Mendez. In the 1930s, it was the Guyanese novelist Edgar Mittelholzer who first raised the question of heredity itself, the phenomenon of racial admixture and the cultural disorientation which lay beneath the West Indians' deep psychological need to define racial and cultural identity.
Palace of the Peacock for Wilson Harris. A woodskin. Mourning its drowned reflection in the mirror of a creek, scissors the water's black silk. The steersman holds for eyes an old storyteller, dips the nib of his paddle in the water's ink and writes. It was the third day of their journey from Mariella. With drowned eyes, his twin reads the slick of his brother's meter, paddling to keep the rhyme. An ancient Arawak woman in a threadbare shawl sleeps between them. Her hair will become a waterfall. Her wrinkled skin an escarpment they must climb, falling to a second death to complete the tale. They will rise with their drowned crew at the bone flute's call for the wedding of rainbow, mist, and granite wall in the peacock colors of the waterfall's bridal veil.
In Sylvia, Middlehalzer retraced to a large extent the terrain of his own boyhood and young manhood, and in the figure of Milton Copse is himself present to comment on the narrow, coercive society whose strictures he so deeply resented. But in the Quamina trilogy, though still personally involved through historical and family ties, he is at a sufficient distance from his subject, Guyana's colonial slave history, to maintain a certain objectivity in the treatment of character and theme. He is able, therefore, to resist the tendency to identify with his characters, a tendency which in most of his work precludes a balanced view of the theory of strength and weakness. When one considers the West Indian preoccupation with identity, with a psychological and cultural split, the most persistent theme in West Indian writing has its origin in colonization and slavery, then the remarkable nature of Middlehalzer's sustained creative effort in the Quamina trilogy, the act of bodying forth that gave it birth, becomes clear. For the conflict in the trilogy between strength and weakness is also the conflict between white and black, master and slave, the basis of that forlorn, sterile round of protest which, in erecting static biases of color or class, forces the West Indian to confront the white world in an attempt at self-identification. This, one suspects, is what lies behind Denis Williams's remark that, though not the greatest Guyanese work ever written, the trilogy was the one which had to be written, not only for clothing the bare bones of history with the vestments of the creative imagination, but also for proposing this unique problem of our relationship to the ancestor. The Quamina trilogy is an epic, imaginative record of the peculiar social and historical reality of Guyana, a national novel, but it is also a prodigious pioneering attempt to examine the cultural and emotional ambivalence which is a heritage of the West Indian past. By embodying the conflicting claims of history and heredity within the violent, ambiguous fortunes of the Van Groningen family, Middlehalzer, like Nathaniel Hawthorne, attempted to exorcise the ghosts of the past, and at the conclusion of the Quamina trilogy, might almost be saying with Hawthorne, "Let us thank God for having given us such ancestors, and let each successive generation thank him, not less fervently, for being one step farther from them in the march of ages."
Epilogue. Ascending the stone steps to his lonely apartment, with his workstation between cold bed and bath, he thought of how he used to mock the sentimental past, make light of history, old men's feverish love of faded things, nostalgia, memento mori. Nearing 60 now, he needed his nostalgia fix each day. His manuscripts and papers stacked upon their mortuary pinewood shelves already had that dead archival look. They were to be a book, but that was history. He slid a drawer out on slick metal grooves. Bundles of inked letters in their dusty cerements, postmarked from a distant land. His were their oblique, practiced italic slant, hers written quickly with a musical, impatient hand. Those letters, faded now, the paper yellowing, freckled, like old onion skin, held all the life he'd lived, the town, the wife he'd loved. When would the rest of life begin? And though each time it hurt like knives to look, he'd throw nothing away. There was his book. Whatever the first half of life might be, the second half he knew would start with memory. One day, he opened his email and downloaded a photograph his son had found in an old album, idyllic, taken 2 years after their marriage. The top half was the portrait a friend had done of her in acrylic. The young couple are posing underneath, not awkwardly like newlyweds, self-conscious in their role. The happiness is as real as grief. She stands, her arms around him from behind, fingers clasped together on his chest. She's smiling. Her whole face glows with pleasure. Seated, arms almost akimbo, he is smiling too. His head is turned slightly, resting on her arm. Again, his eyes are closed as if he knows that he will never be this happy ever again. He'd kept that portrait in a safe, forgotten place since their first move. In all the moving, the living in different countries, the constant traveling, he'd always packed it carefully in his box. The portrait was commissioned work, a marriage gift. Now the box was damaged, label gone, her name inked with a marker pen across the top. He opened up the box. Her eyes kept looking at him as he took the painting out. They seemed gray in the room's light, without those green depths he once knew, as though the dark in the box had drawn the color out. Something else was there, a scrapbook he'd forgotten about. Thumbing through, he found some old unfinished poems, a sketch or two, some sepia photographs, including an early one of her he thought he'd lost. She is seated, smiling, back upright on the bench at Bharrat Street. The light around her head, her windblown hair, is a bright halo. Her dress, a simple cotton print, seems lit from inside. In her arms, a small white dog. He picked up a poem, now faded to an aqua tint, and wiping away the fog that had settled on his fisheye lens, he read. They met. It was foretold. From that moment, the love would unfold. Nothing was clearer. In love, they first grew bold to share those secrets they had never told. Love is a sharer. In love, he brought gifts old and rare, but she gave him a heart of gold, a gift far rarer. In love, they would withhold nothing. They'd let their lives be love-controlled. What could be fairer? In love, when nights were cold, they'd let their children share their bed and fold them, hold them nearer. In love, they will grow old, together as a pair of shoes grows old, used by one wearer. Epilogue by Michael Gilkes from his Jonestown and Other Poems.
I am not starting anything. Look at this mess.
Leave it. I'll clear it up. I said I'll do it.
Okay, okay. You're not doing your eyes any good wearing those shades in the house, you know. You should get your eyes checked, Lionel.
Nah, just eye strain. Been working too hard, reading too much.
And drinking too much.
Drinking doesn't give you eye strain. I want Arthur to see this new painting. It's the most challenging thing I've attempted so far. I think it's going to be good.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. You've been like a cat on hot bricks since you started, covering it up like a baby when you're not in the studio. But Lionel, why do you want to paint something so big? The thing barely fits in the studio.
I did some work on it last night after they left.
My God, Lionel. You mean to say you stayed up painting? And you want to kill yourself or what? It's not enough that you're always working or reading. Staying up late every night?
Well, what do you think, Pat? I'm calling it the robe of ancestors.
You're asking the right one. I don't know a thing about art. What are those faces supposed to be? Your ancestors?
They're ancestral icons.
Ancestral who?
Ancient masks, shapes representing gods and spirit of different cultures. These are Guyanese icons. They go back to our pre-Columbian past. You see, look at this background here. It's made up of all the primary colors, each shading into the other. That's something I learned in the interior. The Amerindians see color differently from us. The leaves in the rainforest aren't just green. The rivers aren't simply black or brown. Everything is subtle, changing even as you look. Well, what do you think of it?
Oh, when Arthur comes, you have to ask him. He's the art critic. Eddie and me could shake hands. We don't understand these intellectual things.
Nothing intellectual about having an opinion. You and Eddie certainly don't have any problem with that, do you? Look, if you don't like the painting, that's all I have to say. It's your opinion. I have to respect it.
I didn't say I don't like it, but you don't really want my opinion. It's people like Arthur you want to impress.
Lionel, this isn't a masterpiece, man. It's a monster piece. You do this yourself?
How long you been working on this, Lionel? Why you kept it so secret? What you calling it?
Robe of ancestors.
Robe of ancestors, eh? Well, I must tell you, I think it's far superior to your Couvard canvas. Yes, I know you're going to say that I'm biased, but this is, well, it's beyond surrealism. It's more down to earth, you know? It's larger than life, not just big, but more iconic, bold, bright colors, man. This painting makes a powerful statement about roots.
I agree about the surrealism thing, no question about it. This isn't surreal. It's real, sir.
Eddie, why you don't sit down and take the weight off your brain?
I tell you talk, you talk. I gotta lie down here and enjoy my beer. Ah, nice.
Seriously though, Lionel, this is powerful stuff you're dealing with. Not so vague and dreamy. The idea of a robe, the fabric constructed from the culture of our ancestors is, well, it's a great idea. Amerindian myths and so on are okay as fantasy, but we have to be concerned with the life of the folk, with roots. But I see you couldn't resist bringing in your Amerindian motifs. What are these markings? Tamari?
No, they're from the designs the YY use in their weaving and basket work. But the whole robe is a blend of motifs from Amerindian, African, Asian, Indian.
Still the same message, Lionel. E pluribus unum, out of the many, one. That old romantic American dream, a dream that doesn't include the black pluribus, of course.
American? There's more than one America and more than one dream. Guyana should be the southernmost pole of that entire hammock of Caribbean islands slung between the three Americas.
After you hear the man, Lionel By, you don't know it, but you're a poet. So I am lying down in the hammock of the Caribbean islands. Nice, man. Nice.
It's not an original metaphor. It's from a Derek Walcott poem. We live in the most diverse cultural region in the world. How can you ignore the incredible mixture of cultures we represent?
I'm not saying we should ignore that fact, but we have to commit ourselves to the cultural base from which we all came. That base is Africa.
We back to that same argument again. Is a painting, man.
Every work of art comes out of some social or cultural consciousness. That means there's a political attitude involved in just about...
I am not interested in the politics of art or the art of politics. Why you think of the painting, Eddie?
Bye. I ain't no art critic. But tell me though, what are all them faces supposed to be? Your ancestors?
No, Eddie. Our ancestors.
They're all staring up into space like if they're seeing spirits. I would like to meet up with any of them on a dark night, ancestors or no ancestors.
Of course, you know, Eddie doesn't believe in racial ancestry and racial memory. He thinks he was specially created. And God said, let there be light and dark and mulatto and Douglas. Right, Eddie?
Very funny. But what's the use getting all worked up about ancestors when most of you don't even know who we grandfather was? Some of you don't even know who we father was.
Speak for yourself, friend.
Anyway, the painting is meant to reflect the variety of ancestors we all have. It's that mixture of cultures that can help us to develop a uniquely Guyanese culture, a unique Caribbean culture. Why should we consider only the African culture as ours? That is what you seem to be saying.
I never said anything of the sort. Look, which races represent the greatest number of people in the Caribbean region?
Wait. Y'all gone back to this race business? Well, Lionel got on his sandals now. Are you run your race around the block? I going for another beer.
Africans and Indians, right? But let me tell you something. If Africans and Indians don't first respect and embrace their own cultures, learn about Mother Africa and Mother India, they will never come to terms with being Guyanese. They will always be rootless.
Ruthless? You mean bad mind without pity? Well, I don't know nobody, so you, Lionel?
Not ruthless, Eddie. Rootless. Without cultural roots.
Oh, so wait, Arthur, you think Guyanese Indians feel ruthless? How much Indians tell you the man? You should talk to me, father. He would set you straight on that.
Pandit Prasad, your father is a Hindu holy man, Eddie. India is still real for him because of his religious faith. That is why he can enter Guyanese political and social life without feeling the need to defend his cultural roots. That's why he could marry outside of the Hindu tradition.
Arthur, let's leave my father-in-law out of this discussion, okay?
Okay, but don't misunderstand me, Lionel, or you, Eddie. I respect and admire your father. He's a progressive religious leader, and we all know that he has suffered from the narrow-mindedness of others, including the Hindu society. I'm only pointing out that his acceptance of his cultural base is what gives him the confidence to be committed to a vision of a unified Guyana. He has roots.
Ah, girl, you just in time. These two at it again. I can get some more beers.
Dead? That fine, that skillful actor man? That midnight robber? Dead? Jesus, we'll miss him. And yet I think we lost him long ago. Since boys we saw him go that road to make belief, acting whatever came into his head. So many skins put on, so many shed. The show was all, real life could wait. His art was all the life he had led. To get inside a part and play it well, so well that he became the thing he played, losing himself. Yes, he was good, one of the best we had. We all applauded what he played. It was so real. But when you got inside his head, he would be somewhere else instead. Up there, I bet he's taking curtain calls again, getting applause, knocking them dead. Saluting the Last of the Red Men by Francis Quamina Farrier. Within the beautiful Guyana society, there are those who are referred to as red men, as well as red women, for that matter. Those folks are light of complexion. To be referred to as a red man in Guyana is not actually disrespectful or insulting. It is, for the better part, endearing. In fact, one of Guyana's celebrity red men is known internationally as Reds Pereira. Following is some of what Guyanese celebrity Ken Corsbie had to say in his tribute to the late Dr. Michael Gilkes, who died of complications of COVID-19 in England. His accumulated productivity over a lifetime as a poet, scholar, playwright, theatre practitioner, and actor filled me with admiration, unquote, stated a highly acclaimed veteran dramatist, broadcaster, storyteller, and yes, red man Ken Corsbie. The two knew each other for decades, since they were boys growing up in Georgetown and spending much of their time in the Tate's Yard on Murray Street. Referring to his earlier work with Michael Gilkes, Corsbie recalled, quote, "We often began without funds, venue, backing, or support system needed for success, and although I did not understand the logistics, somehow Michael made it happen," unquote.